Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to welcome everyone to the Harvey B. Gantt Center's new open air series of virtual studio visits and artist talk. Now in its second month, Open Air was created to uplift Black artists while providing a space for their voices to be heard. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and I have the pleasure of being joined by the one and only Dr. Fahamu Pecou for this edition of Open Air. Hopefully, Fahamu can log in and say hello to us today.
Hey, brother.
Hey, how are you, man?
I'm good. I'm good.
So I want to go ahead and, formally read your bio. It's chock full of great information. So I want to do that before we get started with our conversation. For those who don't know you, Dr. Fahamu Pecou is an interdisciplinary artist and scholar whose work combines observations on hip hop, fine art, and popular culture. Pecou's paintings, performance art, and academic work addresses concerns around contemporary representations of Black masculinity and how these images impact both the reading and performance of Black masculinity. Fahamu received his BFA at the Atlanta College of Art in 1997 and a PhD from Emory University in 2018. Dr. Pecou exhibits his artwork worldwide in addition to lectures and speaking engagements at colleges and universities. As an educator, he has developed Advantage Point, a narrative-based arts curriculum focused on Black male youth. Pecou's work is featured in noted private and public national and international collections, including Smithsonian National Museum of African American Art and Culture, Société Générale in Paris, National Museum at Duke University, the High Museum of Art in Georgia, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, Seattle Art Museum, Paul R. Jones Collection, Clark Atlanta University Art Collection, and Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia. Pecou was recently named the inaugural artist in residence for the Atlanta Beltline. In 2017, he was the subject of a retrospective exhibition, Mirrors de la Home, in Paris, France. His work also appears on several films and television shows, including Blackish, The Shy, and Lifetime's The 10th Date. He's also the recipient of the 2016 Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Award. I am delighted and head over heels to have a conversation today with Dr. Fahamu Pecou. Thank you.
Thank you, man. That bio sounds like I've been kind of busy.
Yeah, you have been kind of busy. So, let me just kind of let the cat out of the bag. I've known you a long time now.
Very long time.
I was actually thinking about that earlier today, so I started digging in the crates, and here's what I found that I have in the crates. I have Phenomenon. This book, Phenomenon, is actually the first thing I ever saw about you, and I think I got my hands on this book in 2009.
Oh, wow.
Because I think you published the book in 2008.
Yeah.
So this is a 12-year-old publication, and here we are 12 years later having a conversation, still alive, still thriving.
Yes.
So, you know, I know that there are probably quite a few people watching this that have some level of familiarity with your work and who you are. But I want to start by sort of talking to the uninitiated, right? Who is Fahamu Pecou, right? We read the bio, right? So can you give me just a little, like in your own words, understanding of who you are as an artist, what informs your work, and then we can kind of use that as a launching pad for some other questions that I have.
Certainly. Well, first of all, thanks to you and the Harvey B. Gantt Center and to your audience for tuning in. Yeah, I've been an artist since I could hold a pencil. You know, like I've never imagined myself being anything else. I never aspired to be anything else. I never even actually tried to do anything else other than what I'm currently doing. But it wasn't until I actually started my undergrad work at the Atlanta College of Art that I actually began to understand what that actually means to be an artist. From the time I was maybe 9 years old until I got to college, I knew that I was going to be the Black Walt Disney. Like I just wanted to be, a cartoon animator. But at the Atlanta College of Art, I was introduced to the fine arts and introduced to painting and sculpture, the art theory, art history, the entire canon opened me up to the possibilities for what could be. And upon my graduation, my senior thesis exhibition from the Atlanta College of Art, I finally came to terms with the type of artist that I wanted to be. I saw the impact that art could have on people as a way of healing us and creating spaces for us to grow and to connect to one another. And I decided at that point that I didn't want to make art that was just pretty pictures. I wanted to make art that would mean something, that would do something, that could offer healing to those who needed healing, could offer joy to those who needed joy. But I wanted my work to serve a purpose and not just look nice on the wall.
No, that's actually that's profound and it's great. And I think about my first encounters with your work. If I'm not mistaken, I think the first exhibition of your work that I saw was the exhibition Black Presidential.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a show on the heels of Obama's election. If I'm not mistaken, that show took place in 2009 at Lions Weir Gallery in New York City.
Correct. Yep, that's correct.
And it was striking to me because I had a sense of what your work was about, but then spending time in that show and looking at the different paintings that were not only informed by Obama's election, but also informed by the financial crisis, the two things that sort of like coincided with one another. So I'd love to just spend a moment talking about that point in time in your career. I mean, that was about 12 years ago. It seems like a lifetime ago. I mean, wow, 2008 and 9. And when I think about those years, they weren't that long ago, relatively speaking, but almost look, the pandemic notwithstanding, like put that aside, that's a game changer on a whole nother level. But in terms of like how different the art world seems just from 2008 and 9 to now. So can you talk a little bit about that time in your career, but then also like your journey as an artist in the past decade? Because I have a feeling that the past decade has been like a wild ride for you.
Oh, most certainly. And I think, to your point, those shifts in the sort of like cultural landscape have been significant, across the board. At the point that we're talking with Black Presidential, I had, come out of, creating work that was a sort of direct subversion or mockery of like celebrity culture and, the fascination that we have with celebrity culture with the hip hop male body, so I was playing around with that a lot around the time that Obama became, like the buzzword, right? And it was really fascinating to me. It was really fascinating to me to observe the way that many people, many white people, and even some Black people were really sort of taken aback by how well put together Barack Obama was. Like they were kind of like, how is this guy, like he's Black and he's smart and he's, good to his wife and he's, so it's, those kinds of things fascinated me. And so I began to play around with that, with this idea that our society was so confused, around a Black man who could actually articulate a sentence, right? And so the Black presidential show really kind of began as a sort of tongue-in-cheek way to poke fun at that. But around that same time, I also became a father to a son, and that significantly changed the sort of jokey way that I was approaching these questions around Black masculinity. And I really began to ask myself, like, what does it mean to be a Black man? What does it mean to raise a Black man? And that took my work down a completely different course. There's still some of the humor and stuff in there, but I'm also dealing with a very serious and as we know, a very urgent question in terms of how we as Black men are both seen, but also how that seeing informs how we perform our identities.
Yeah. I mean, and that leads me to the thing that I touched on in my last question, and that is like the journey, not only as an artist, but also as a Black male artist in the past decade. As a curator, I look back on the past 10 years and I say to myself, I wonder if I would have had the same experience if those 10 years had been, in the well, I know it wouldn't have been the same experience, it goes without saying, if that had been in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
or if that 10 years had been in the 90s. I mean, the world is going through so many palpitations right now about trying to, for lack of a better word, like almost like digest Black people and
Mm-hmm.
sort of like take them into the system to sort of understand like what they're even all about. Because your point about Obama, I think is like spot on. I remember so many conversations around that time. And again, I was already sort of had my one, at least one of my feet in the art world at that time, where there still was that sort of shock and awe around the idea of someone embodying all those things. And then how I relate this back to the art world, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey in the past 10 years as an artist. It's sort of like, I remember when the galleries had almost completely closed doors to young Black artists. It was almost like, I would get the question, how can I get representation? And I would be like, like a wish and a prayer, right? And now I have young Black artists, with no exaggeration, emailing me, asking me which of the following 5 galleries they should go with because they all want to represent them. Mm-hmm. So something's going on.
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, and to your point, the whole sort of shtick that I initially introduced my work to the world with was really around that. You didn't see Black artists on the covers of art magazines. You didn't see them in the galleries. You didn't see them. You didn't see critics and people fighting over. You didn't see that work at the auctions. And so, a part of what I began my career doing was not only injecting myself, but kicking in the door, so to speak, by actually painting my character, in this like bravado and swag and all the attitude on the covers of these art magazines as a way of saying, like, you can't deny my presence. And as I thought deeper about that, like, to your question, in the last 10 years, I really have tried to live with the question of what does my identity, what does my presence actually look like in the world? What does it mean in the world? Who told me that, the ways that I see myself and I perform my identity, were the way for me to go? So I'm like, interrogating all of these questions, and really ultimately at the end of the day, I feel like my practice is around humanizing Black men by illustrating some of the nuance and the complexity that we experience. So, whereas before it might have been about trying to nudge my way into the vision, the visual space of whiteness, now it's more about going inside. It's more about the interiority of Blackness.
Yeah, I dig that. It's for sure. And I know we have other things we want to get into in this somewhat brief conversation because time is just already flying. But the other thing I wanted to talk about is when I met you, you were Fahamu Pecou. Now you're Dr. Fahamu Pecou. You know, and I remember you mentioned to me, or I don't know, it was grapevine that you were going for your PhD, and I was like, whoa, that's a trip. You know, what was that like? I mean, I'm not asking that in a sense of like how hard it was, because I'm sure it was pretty difficult. But what was that process like for you? Why did you even decide to do that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And the thing that I want to say is that I'm glad to have a space to discuss that, to talk about that, because I do think that it's important that we also see ourselves as our scholars and authorities, right? And so that's really what led me there. As I mentioned before earlier in my work, I was kind of interrogating like the spectacle of Black masculinity, and oftentimes when I would create a body of work or a series, I would have people be like, "Oh wow, what you're talking about in this painting reminds me of what Bell Hooks writes about in X, Y, and Z." And mind you, I wasn't familiar with that text, so I would go grab that book, I would read it, and be like, "Oh wow, I do see what they were saying, but oh, she's also saying this, and this is dope too." And so then that would lead me down to another rabbit hole. And so my practice became very sort of research based, even without me realizing that I was
Mm,
a researcher in that way. And the more I dug in and the more I discovered, the more I realized that there's a whole world of information out there around this subject matter that I could tap into that would enhance what it is that I'm attempting to say in my own work. And I was also challenged by the fact that oftentimes that literature was not even created by a person that looked like me. So it's about Black masculinity, but it's by people who have never lived a Black male experience. And so I was like, well, why not me?
right.
And so that really kind of led me there. Like I really started the journey towards my PhD as a way to expand the conversation on the subject matter of Black masculinity, but ultimately realizing that more of us need to be in those spaces and in those rooms and figure out ways of making that information accessible to our young brothers and sisters who are out here in the world who don't know that that information exists, right? So people are walking around trying to figure it out. There's ways we can see that and talk about it and uncover it, and so that's what I'm trying to do.
Oh, fantastic. So I want to go into looking at some of your work. I know we've prepared a slide presentation, and we can get that going up on the screen, and I can ask you some questions about some of these works. And if there's, it looks like there might be some cropping going on here, but
Yeah.
hopefully we can just move. We can move through them, and I can just ask you what at least I would like to know, and perhaps that mirrors what some of the people watching this would like to know. So, if I'm not mistaken, this painting also is a depiction of Studio Museum in Harlem's publication studio. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So between about 2002 and 2012 or so, uh, the majority of my paintings were projections on the covers of fine art and culture magazines. And so I would just collect magazines from across the spectrum and interject my character and my observations onto the covers of these magazines and then do large scale paintings. So this particular piece, as you mentioned, is appears on the cover of Studio, which is a magazine from the Studio Museum in Harlem. But the photograph that is used, as this cover was actually a candid photo that was taken of me and my date at at an art opening. And so I would often take images that people took of me, just candid photos, and then put them on the covers of magazines.
Right. Could we move on to the next one? This is one of my favorites. Favorites and many favorites. I feel like this piece here also is a callback to another important artist, Barclay Hendricks, in
Hmm.
some regards, especially like the digitizing of the genitalia, because I think I've seen several Hendricks paintings where the genitalia would not digitize.
Ironically enough, I did this painting before I was ever familiar with Barclay Hendricks' work. And after after I saw Barkley Hendricks work for the first time, man, I literally threw my paintbrushes down.
Did
It's
you?
like, yeah, I was like, hold on, man, this is painting. And I literally went back in the lab and I taught myself how to paint all over again, like studying Barkley Hendricks and really, even to this day, I consider myself chasing Barkley Hendricks when I paint.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So this was a work that was actually in the Black Presidential Show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that is correct. This one is called Art Official Intelligence. And as we mentioned before, as Barack Obama was, then running and then ultimately elected president between 2008, 2009, I created this series imagining my own character as the Black president. And so this manifested in this series of paintings, but it was also performance art. I actually had an opportunity to share this work at Art Basel in Switzerland in the summer of 2009. And, actually had my cousin Bass, travel with me as my Secret Service. And we performed as the Black president every day at the Volta Fair in Art Basel, Switzerland. We did a similar kind of performance piece at Lionswear Gallery in the fall of 2009 when this work was exhibited there as well.
So can you spend a moment on the performative aspect of your practice? I know we may not have any examples of that, but I think that's an important thing to talk about, especially for those who aren't as familiar with you as I am in terms of where that fits into the puzzle.
Well, yeah, actually, when I think about it or when asked, I often refer to myself as a performance artist first. Maybe even more than a painter. Like the paintings are the grand finale of the performance for me. So all of my work, begins with these photo shoots where, based on the concept that I'm working with, I perform as that character. And then that's documented through photo shoots. And then I go through an editing process, selecting the images, and then ultimately making paintings from those selections. Paintings and drawings, I should say, from those selections. So the performance is actually the beginning of the piece. This people often say you only paint yourself, and I'm always very, very intentional in saying that it's not me that I'm painting. Like they're not self-portraits. I'm performing as a character. Yes, it's my body, but it's not about me as a person.
Right. And I've had that conversation with people about your work as well, where they will say to me, you've heard it all, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, why is he so self-centered? Oh my God. like, how's he painting himself all the time? And I've had that very same conversation. It's like, actually, if you think about an actor who plays mm-hmm. many different roles across many different films, you don't actually say that, since random, you don't say Brad Pitt is playing Brad Pitt in every movie that you see him in. Right. He's playing a character, and what you're doing is similar. You're playing a character. You just happen to be the actor playing the role, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is a more recent work here.
Well, yeah, this is actually 2012. And this is a piece called All That Glitters Ain't Golds. This was actually one of the first projects where the paintings, the performance, and the video aspect of my work come into play. So with this series, I actually recorded an album, a hip hop album called All That Glitters Ain't Golds. And when this work was installed at Lionswear Gallery in 2012, we had QR codes next to each one of the paintings. And if you're visiting the gallery, you could scan that code with your device. You would download the track and the music video that accompanies the piece to also incorporate that into your viewing experience. And the idea was that the subject matter, again, being so intimately tied to Black male youth and to Black culture more broadly, that oftentimes a lot of us are not in the galleries and spaces to actually engage with this work. So I wanted to create other points of entry for people who may not necessarily feel comfortable going to a gallery, or even know that this work was available to be seen in the gallery. The album, had a life of its own and was able to bring people back. The videos had lives of their own and were able to bring people back to the paintings. And so there's this conversation that's happening across discipline, but creating, like I said, multiple points of entry for people to come in where they feel most comfortable.
So I want to pivot for a second before we talk about this next work, because something you did before we started this interview earlier on, when we were doing our mic checks and all of that, actually made me think about something that I did earlier this morning when I was out, like walking my dog or something like that. So you were doing your mic check, and for whatever reason, you decided that your mic check was going to be some LL Cool J lyrics. And you and I are brothers of a certain age. And I was walking my dog this morning, and for some reason, I just broke into Welcome to the Terror Dome by Public Enemy outside, walking by myself, which is like something I do often. Just start reciting hip hop lyrics that were influential to me when I was growing up. It's like almost a meditative thing. And it made me think about like the role that hip hop has played in my life. And in reading the description of your work and your bio, obviously hip hop is a through line. It's like a critical component to the whole. And I would love for you to just, and I'll share too, to sort of talk about the place that hip hop plays in your life. And the reason I think it's important to talk about this is that, like every 15 years or so, hip hop gets written off by those who no longer understand it. Mm-hmm. Right? I found myself writing it off fairly recently because there's a whole generation of hip hop artists that I can't connect with. But I would have fought to the bitter end if anybody told me that hip hop wasn't the most important thing in the world 25 years ago, right? So what role has hip hop played in your life?
Oh man, I think there's parallels between our experience with hip hop. I always say that I'm first generation hip hop. Like I'm born in 1975, so it's literally been the soundtrack to my life. And it's like I consider myself a performance artist. I also consider myself a hip hop artist, but in the broader sense of hip hop, like hip hop as a culture, not just hip hop the music form, but hip hop as a culture. I'm very much both born of that, but also responding to that. My paintings often take their cues from the language of hip hop. Our paintings are titled after lyrics in hip hop songs. I inscribe the lyrics into the works. I write my own hip hop songs. You know what I mean? So it's like it's not even a part of me. It is me. I would be lying to myself and others if I did not make that as evident and apparent as I think it is. But it's also been a great sort of bridge builder too, across cultures and across across disciplines. It opens a lot of doors. For example, when I share my work in Europe, I might have some obscure line from 3 Feet High and Rising, and inevitably there's some Slovakian kid who's like, yo, that's from track 3 of the, you know what I mean? And then we're having a dialogue.
B-sides, things, obscure references to things that almost no one should even remember, but somehow there's at least 100,000 people on the planet that know exactly what it is, and you just happen to run into them, right? For sure. So let's go back to the slideshow. Can you talk about this work here?
Yeah, this is from a series in 2014. My first museum show, actually, called Gravity. The concept of that exhibition centered around the idea that a lot of times the language that we use to talk about and describe Black male masculinity is weighted with these notions of tragedy and trauma, right? So it's most Black men won't graduate from high school, or you're 5 times more likely to end up in prison and have a career. All of these negative stats that get piled on us, and that these things over time become like a albatross, around our necks, to the point that, a lot of young men just grow towards apathy because it's like, why try, right? And so this exhibition for me, ultimately, the idea was, the question was, what would happen if we talked to our young Black men differently? Could they defy gravity, right? Gravity being the grave and serious nature of the conversation. At the same time, it's also a critical examination of like the trend of sagging. So the sagging pants, which you will see more and more in my work, is an allegory to talk about movement, but also to talk about like the desire to stand out, right? So certain ideas of, about politics of respectability that get projected onto Black men is really, destructive. Like it erases you. And sagging, becomes a sort of obstinate way to defy those rules, right? So it's not only do you have to see me, right? But now I'm going to offend you in seeing me. And so there's a sort of deliberate, intentional obstinacy in sagging. It's a sort of, it's oppositional fashion, which is a really fascinating concept. So I continue to use sagging as an allegory to talk about the sort of like body autonomy and agency over the Black body.
Move to the next one.
So this piece is continuing that Gravity series. This piece is called Still I Rise. And so I'm often juxtaposing these kinds of elements like the gold leaf, which, in many ways sort of indicates like value and, like higher sort of like spiritual resonance, but juxtaposing that with these bodies, with the sagging pants, the Black skin, all of these things that, create such contention in the world. I'm trying to depict them as beautiful, trying to depict them as breakout, right? As defiant, as I mentioned before. And so that's what this piece is referencing.
And so this is from a slightly different, this is from a different series altogether.
Yeah, this is one of the more recent pieces. This is from an exhibition that I did in 2019 in LA called Trapidemia. And this piece is called Young Thug, but Young is as in Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst. And so, with Trapidemia is another one of my sort of larger concepts that I've been exploring and working with, where I argue that trap is not just, this thing of like drugs and crime and things like that, but that trap is actually a technology. It's something that we as Black people have employed for centuries, especially as we've been oppressed and marginalized. Trapping is basically hustling. It's that thing that you do to get by. It's your way of like subverting the system. And so with Trapidemia, I'm interested in exploring all the different ways that trap manifests in our lives in different ways. And so I'm juxtaposing notions of trap with like African spirituality and subversion, thinking like, deities like the Orisha Eshu, who's always coming and going at the same time. He's the loudest one in the room, but he never says anything. So I love those kinds of like subversions in ways that we as Black people play with the dominant structures that try to dictate to us how we should be in the world.
Awesome. So we're gonna speak on this work, and then we're gonna get to my favorite part of these open air sessions, which is the virtual studio tour. So, so if you could speak on this particular work here, and I know there's, like I said, there's some cropping going on, but I think there's enough being communicated here that you could talk on.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this one is cropped off because the parts of it that are cropped off are probably the more substantial aspects of the piece. But this is a piece called Things Fall Apart. And if you could see the entire piece, on the end where the figure is facing, there's a copy of Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart. On the back end of the stick that's balancing on his head is a Sankofa bird. And so this is a piece from 2020. It's a series. It's a another iteration of Trapidemia, but the subtitle of this one, of this series, is Lit. And so it's lit as in literature, but also lit as in enlightenment, lit as in being hype, right? And so it's like a triple entendre. So, you know, with Trapidemia, I'm, you know, trying to, you know, challenge the way that we read certain types of Black bodies.
Right.
And re-image them as again, as beautiful, as contemplative, as nuanced, and you know, give us different ways, or give us a different perspective to think about Trap through.
Well, what was cropped will be revealed. Let's switch to the virtual studio tour portion of our conversation here, where we can actually see some of the works that are in your space.
All right, let's see here. We get the camera thing going, right? I'm going to mute this.
Sure, sure.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, and
So right now it's at a, there you go, perfect.
all right.
Oh, look at that. The work's on the screen now.
Okay, so this is in the studio. I have a gallery set up that allows me to show work as it's created, or after it's created.
Could you stop here on the work with the yellow background for a moment?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Could you go back to the painting or the work with the yellow background of the woman? Yeah, I was looking at this over your shoulder, and I think I may have seen this image on Instagram as well. It's fascinating to me for a couple of reasons. I mean, I know that you've all, at least it seems to me that you've always incorporated women into your paintings in one way or another, as far back as I can remember knowing your work. But it seems like they may be becoming a bit more pronounced now. Is it true to say that that you're painting more women in your work now?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. And a part of that is thinking about, you know, notions of balance. You know, if we're thinking about the wholeness, if we're thinking about the fullness in the expressions of Blackness, you know, I want to tell a complete story. And so with this series in particular, you know, where I'm often referencing orishas, you know, it's also equally important to incorporate women in those works.
And here's something I want to ask. I know it is impossible for you to give anybody, you know, a couple minutes, sort of like understanding what you're talking about when you talk about orishas. But it would be good to give some context for those watching this that may not have a reference point to some of those things that you're talking about, and how that's made its way more prominently into your work.
Well, yes, I can try to give a quick and dirty. So the orishas are part of the pantheon of the Yoruba cosmology, which is a spiritual practice in Nigeria, West Africa. Ifa is also the spiritual system that traveled largely with our ancestors in the transatlantic slave trade, and you know, really sort of connects us to our ancestry and to our legacies. And so in the last decade, I became initiated in that practice, and it's come to largely inform not only my work, but my personal philosophy and the way that I move in the world.
Outstanding.
And then these are a couple other pieces from that Trapidemia series. Kind of zoom in a bit.
And are we looking at original paintings or reproductions of
Yes.
paintings?
These are original canvases, so you can see there.
Fantastic.
This is a work on paper, actually.
So, so this begs the question: where are you heading? You've been on a heck of a journey, and I got to imagine that you're planning something quite interesting for the next phase of Fahamu Pecou's career. Like, what's on the horizon for you, if you're comfortable talking about it?
Yeah, I actually recently started a museum. It's called Adama, the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. And the goal there is to create a world-class arts destination that celebrates the 21st century African diaspora forms. So we are a new initiative. We have a program that we do called the Adama Art Salon, where we interview or we have panels with artists and curators and arts leaders from around the world who center the African diaspora in their practices. Yeah, so it's rolling along, and I'm really excited about
that's
where that will lead us.
That's something I have a few more questions about, but I also see that I've got some questions that came in on the chat. So maybe you can go back to your laptop and stabilize, and we can get through some of these questions that people would love to ask of you. I'll throw the first one at you right now, and that is, why did you choose Atlanta College of Art? Now, that was a long time ago you made that decision, but why did you choose Atlanta College of Art?
Let's see. Are we back?
Let's see. Are we back?
Yeah, we're back. We're back.
Okay.
So there's some feedback, so we want to make sure we turn that off. Yeah. Okay, great. That's perfect.
So Atlanta College of Art, it was actually really interesting. I did not choose the Atlanta College of Art. I didn't even know it existed before being invited there. In fact, at the time I was living in South Carolina, and I was planning to go to the Art Institute of Atlanta because I saw that they had an animation program, and mind you, that was, tunnel vision, cartoon animation. But I won a statewide competition in South Carolina in my senior year in high school, and a recruiter from the Atlanta College of Art actually came to the school to introduce me to their program, and they offered me a scholarship, and the rest is history.
You touched on this before, but someone wants to know, how has achieving your PhD informed your work? Now, I know you touched on it a bit, but maybe more pointedly, I guess what they're trying to, I think at the heart of this question is, before you had your PhD, your work was one way, and did your work become something else on the other side of it?
If anything else, I would say it just became more thoughtful, right? So one of the things that's always been interesting to me about my approach to anything is I always lead with questions, right? So even when I started with those early paintings on the magazine covers, it wasn't so much like, I'm going to do this. It was more like, what would happen if I do this, And so that has kind of continued to sort of like underscore, how I move and how I think. The PhD program actually helped me learn how to interrogate even deeper, right? And so, ultimately, my work is not even statements; it's more questions, right? And that's, for me, that feels like a much richer engagement. It's not a flat engagement; it's interactive. Now it's dynamic, right? So now not only am I asking you questions, perhaps you're asking yourself questions, as you consider the work, and that's the most interesting part to me. I would also say that the other thing that really changed is that the work became a bit more introspective, quiet. Like in the earlier paintings, I had so many ideas. It was like everything was in there. Like my paintings were like onions. You can just peel layers and layers and layers, and everything was on the surface. And now, as you see those, even with the works behind me, there's a lot going on in terms of the figure and maybe the posing and all of that. But there's not a lot of information in there. Like I want to really get you to focus and think. And I think the PhD program helped me to find another form of expression so that I can get all of those ideas out. So like, I also now do a lot of critical writing in addition to my paintings. So, for every series, I have an entire 15, 20, 30-page essay where I've worked through a lot of these ideas and landed at an additional set of questions, which then becomes the work. And so that has, again, allowed me to go deeper into the process than I think I was before.
That's fantastic. So every artist gets asked the next question that came up. Every artist gets asked this question. And that is, who are your favorite painters? I know. So yeah, if you would indulge us.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I'd love to. So definitely Barkley Hendricks. That's my guy. I really love Kalita Garcia, and happened to actually be former classmates with both Kalita Garcia and Amy Sherrill, whose work I also really love. Big fan of Derek Adams. Who else? Tim Okamura. Just really, super love his paintings as well. There's a young artist, or two young artists in Atlanta whose work I really sweat. One is a young brother named Gerald Lavelle.
I recently worked with Gerald on the project, yeah.
Yeah, and then a sister by the name of Ariel Danielle. Fantastic painters all, and I really just enjoy being with their work. But if I'm being asked who my favorite artist is, it's David Hemmings.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that David Hemmings is one of my favorite artists, and then I'll put an asterisk next to that to say, because I still don't think I understand David Hemmings. Like
yes,
you know what I mean?
But that's a part of the brilliance of it, is that months, years later, you're still like, wow.
And not only can I say I don't know if I understand his work, but even his career, how he's moved in his career. How is he so important yet so elusive?
Yeah.
How is he so present yet so invisible? He's a trip. Like his whole thing is a trip to me.
Yeah, that's the part that I love about his work the most, is that it is it is so ironic, right? Like it's that trickster thing again, like Eshu, you know what I'm saying? It makes sense and it doesn't at the same time.
Right. No, absolutely. So someone asked, are you teaching anywhere currently?
Yeah, actually, I'm teaching at Morehouse, doing a couple classes there. One is a theory course that looks at representations of the Black male body in popular culture, and then a survey of visual arts course. And then I'm also a part of a program at Emory, which is a new initiative called the Arts and Social Justice Fellowship, where they paired professors on campus with artists whose work is at the center of arts and social justice to co-teach a course across the campus. So I'm actually partnered with Dr. Ari Eisen, who's a biologist, and we're co-teaching an epigenetics course.
Wow. So we're down to the final 10 minutes and I have about like 6 questions. So let's see if we can do this, okay? So the first one, I'm gonna cheat here. I'm gonna give you my question. And it's a silly one, but it's just like, did you ever think you'd be teaching at Morehouse? It's like, that's like, yeah, I got it. I mean, just for someone who's been living in Atlanta as long as you have been, I mean, what is that? I mean, I don't mean what it's like. Obviously, it's like walking into a building and teaching, but like, what does that feel like?
Oh, it's actually really really amazing. I'm looking forward. This is my first time teaching there. This will be my first semester teaching there, and I'm really looking forward to engaging that community, especially given the subject matter of my work. You know, being able to make connections there on the campus, and to be able to work with the students there, I think will be enriching for me. So I'm looking forward to that.
You were born in Brooklyn, weren't you?
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's like, if you ask my opinion, not that you asked, but I think the universe conspired to have you conceived, born in Brooklyn, and through all of the machinations of your life and your career, it's sort of like was your destiny to be teaching, and your destiny to be teaching where you're teaching. It's just funny how life does that, right?
Yeah.
Someone asked a question about the museum that you created. So is the new museum going to be located in Atlanta as a physical space? Is that the goal?
Yes. Yeah, it will be a physical space. We're virtual right now, but it will be a physical space in Atlanta. Atlanta is an international hub city. It blows my mind that we don't already have something like that here.
Right.
And so because it's an international hub, because it's history with Black culture, because of the legacy of Black art here, I think Atlanta is the perfect place to have an institution like this, and to be able to impact, again, the arts and Black arts specifically in the 21st century and beyond.
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true. I think you're spot on with that. We had a question about, this goes back to your work. Do you believe social media has been helpful to your career? And in what ways, if so?
Yeah, man.
I think you were built for social media, by the way.
But I always joke around. I say that I was doing social media viral campaigns before there was a such thing.
It's true.
Back in 2007, 2008, I was all over Black Planet and MySpace with these tongue-in-cheek ads. I would create fake accounts to promote my main accounts. You know what I mean? And just really using it as a tool to spread the word about the work that I did. Yeah.
And what about now? What role does it play now? Would you say it's just an amplification of what you were already doing?
I think it's a little bit of both. It certainly has become a really great point of contact. Again, because I don't often show my work in Atlanta, and people can access me from wherever and see what I'm working on, and connect to me, communicate with me in ways that you might not be able to do if I was just doing a show in New York. If you happen to be in New York, you saw it. Now the work is, anybody can get it, anybody can see it, anybody can connect with it, and I think that has been great. But I'm also 45, and man, I can barely keep up with what's going on with social media. It's so much, but I really do love it as a space of engagement. I really do love being able to not only share my work there, but be able to connect to other artists around the world and see what they're working on.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate to that feeling of trying to keep up with it. I've come up with a formula. I mean, it might not work for other people, but my formula is, first I was skeptical. Then I realized it was important. Now I've just embraced it in my own way. I'm no longer skeptical about it. I know it's a tool. I use it in the ways that I see fit. And I also know when I'm overdoing it and I need to chill out. And just literally just pull back from it, chill out, don't engage, do not engage. So someone asked a question that's a really unique question, and that is, how do you keep your bliss? How do you keep your happiness?
Oh, wow. Couple things. One, I love what I do. I love it. It gives me joy to make art. It gives me joy to see that other people enjoy seeing my art. Like that, it makes me happy. But the other thing, hands down, my family, they keep me grounded, like knee deep grounded, I have, 4 amazing children, a wonderful wife. We now have a little grandbaby. Like that keeps me grounded. That keeps me going. So yeah, that's my bliss right there.
Yeah, that's important. That's really important. So in our final few minutes, I just want to, kind of give it over to you to just to ask you, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to talk about? Because I'm quite sure there must be. We're in some really unique times right now, right? And so I got to imagine that there are artists watching this right now, different age groups, some young, some older than us. Um, how you even staying focused on being an artist? And I kind of stepped on the question because I wanted you to tell me if there's something you wanted to talk about. But if in absence of that, if you don't have anything, I would love to sort of hear about that. Like how are you even staying focused right now?
You know, it's interesting because I grew up in a really sort of turbulent environment. It was not a pleasant experience at all. And art was my way of tuning all of that stuff out. I could just do that and everything else would disappear. And it continues to be that. It's therapeutic. Like, as much as I enjoy it, I'm grateful that it's my career. But even if I wasn't making money doing this would be my way of getting through all of this, you know. Uh, and I think that is something that is important to maybe leave our audience with, is understanding the role that art plays in our lives. Not just for those who make it, but for those who also experience it, right? Like, I always say in the future, historians will tell what happened, but artists will tell how it felt. And it's through art, whether it's music, whether it's through writing, whether it's through photography or painting or dance, that's how we as human beings connect to one another. Like, art is a spiritual language that allows us to speak where words fail, right? And I think, as an artist, I feel a certain sense of responsibility. It's like having a superpower, right? I feel a certain sense of responsibility with the art that I create to make it mean something. And in doing that, it gives me peace, it gives me comfort, it gives me joy. And yeah, it gives me purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say it any better. I've been thinking a lot about this time that we're in right now, and what's ironic about it is that it's brought me closer to so many people, even though I haven't physically been in their presence. That I have spent more time talking to people that I either hadn't talked to in a while in this type of format, or was so busy, and now I feel it's funny. I feel more connected to people now than I have in the past few years as a result of being forced to not leave my house, So I think that's like the silver lining, one of the silver linings to these times. But, I can't thank you enough for participating in this conversation, welcoming us, although virtually, into your space, giving us your time. I don't take that for granted. And I know that, when I reached out to you about this, it wasn't as if I gave you all of the lead time in the world. So thank you for being responsive and being generous and being open. So just, I can't thank you enough. I want to thank the Harvey B. Gantt Center for creating this platform. I've been working with the Gantt Center on various projects for the last few years now. I know that you have a relationship with the Gantt Center that dates back to maybe a decade. Decade or so. So just, I want to say to everyone that has tuned in today, support the Gantt Center so that they can continue creating platforms like this and programs like this. When we are able to be in the same room together, visit the Gantt Center, go to exhibitions. And one quick question for Fahamu. I mean, I know that because of the COVID pandemic, a lot of things have been canceled, but are there exhibitions that were in the works? Is there anything on the horizon assuming people can gather again in 2021, is there some Fahamu Pecou show that people can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, for sure. I actually have a show that opens in October in Dallas. It's actually going to be the third iteration of the Trapidemia series. So you're actually getting a sneak peek with these works that are behind me. So that show is in October. I have a few projects that I'm working on now for 2021 that are still sort of like forming. But yeah, we'll be out there.
Awesome, man.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Awesome. So I can't thank you enough. Have a great evening. Thank you for everyone for participating in today's talk. We're signing off, and thank you to the Harvey B. Gantt Center.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining tonight's open air conversation. Please consider donating to the Gantt Center via our Text to Give platform to support our growth and impact in community initiatives. By texting Unmasked to 345-345, you assist in allowing the Gantt Center to continue and further our mission. We thank you in advance for your support and for your contributions to the Gantt Center. Tune in next Tuesday, August 25th, for our latest Unmasked conversation on identity in the Black LGBTQ+ community.